Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Ant Morse. I'm a futurist, author and technology researcher, and also the head of innovation and account engagement at Virgin Media O2. In my role as a futurist, I'm expected to kind of predict the future and almost have a view of what's going to happen. And as we heard from Magnus and from Dom, looking at that with a lens of AI is incredibly difficult. It's been described as the electricity of our next industrial revolution, or next stage of the digital revolution, I guess. And it's no mean feat. Now, if you think about how we plan and foresee some of these and understand some of these rapidly evolving technologies, the question then falls to, well, how do we all keep relevant? How do we all stay relevant? And how do we as business leaders lead and manage change within our organization? So that's really what we're here to talk about today, is what is the challenge that we face as enterprises? So obviously you guys are out selling your wares and pitching your solutions and benefits to enterprises. So we thought today we would bring a view from the enterprise. So we're joined by public sector, private sector, and also accessibility, which as we evolve our organization should be absolute front and center of what we do. So I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into a debate on what challenges they face. So Alan, if I could pass to you your organization and role, please.
Morning, everyone. So this is interesting for me because quite often we're one of the biggest businesses that people have never heard of. Alan Dine, our Business Systems Director within M Group Services. We're currently around 11,000 employees, about the same in the supply chain. And depending on which metric you use, we are the largest infrastructure services provider in the country. We are UK-based, and what does infrastructure services mean? So what we do is we make the water come out the tap, we make the electricity make it to the plug, but also there's things like we make sure the runways are clear for takeoffs and landings, we clear the motorways to make sure the traffic runs, the trains move, etc. My current focus, where I am at the moment, is in telecoms, so we're talking about telecoms infrastructure, and at the moment we're running up and down the country, putting in the lovely gigabit fibre for the big names that people are familiar with. We're also supporting critical national infrastructure for people like the National Grid, but we're also doing construction products as well. So one of the tallest structures in Europe was built by us, the Billsdale Antenna up in Yorkshire. So we're pretty busy at the moment.
Fantastic. So any flight delays or power cuts, we can come and see you, all right?
I will give you the right contact.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for joining us today. And I'll pass to Laurie.
Hello. It's on. Okay. Hello, I'm Laurie de Bon-Conyers. I work at the Royal National Institute of Blind People. It's the largest charity dealing with people with sight loss and supporting them throughout the journey with sight loss. Could be congenital, but most of the time is people in their 60s or 70s that lose their sight, and it's quite a traumatic experience. I am a senior user experience consultant, so I work in the team that tries to get all these lovely products. Could be websites, apps, physical products like televisions, showers, touch screen, chip and pin devices, software packages accessible. And you probably all have something that we worked on and involved users in testing, is your banknote, if you still use them. I suppose everybody's using contactless these days, but you will find blobs on some tactile features on the banknote top left corner, and those are a way for people to recognize if they're paying with a £10 note, £20 note, and we were involved with the Bank of England of testing that. So those are the kind of things that we do every day.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us. Accessibility for me is a very interesting topic because I think AI and lots of spatial compute progressions of technology are going to inadvertently help disability and sight loss in a huge way. So really interested to get into some detail on that, Laurie. And I'll pass to Neil.
Morning, everyone. I'm Neil Owen. I work for the organisation that everyone knows and loves. Thank you for that, Dominic. The Department for Work and Pensions. So we, central government department, we support up to around 22 million citizens. We've got about 100,000 employees, and I lead effectively the collaboration and communication services for those 100,000 colleagues across the organisation.
Wow, so I think totting up the number of employees, we're 18,700 at Virgin Media O2, so I think we're definitely a fair representation of enterprise customers today, so feel free to ask us any questions after this session as well. So Neil, I'm going to come to you first. you know, as a futurist looking at the technology, the plethora of technology coming through is huge. But what's the biggest challenge that your organisation is facing from a technology point of view at the moment?
I think I'm going to avoid AI. So Dominic talked about two things. He talked about reducing cost, and I see that as an opportunity rather than a challenge, leveraging AI. So I'm going to go with three other things: debt, confidence, and capability. So as we've been modernising our services, as with everybody, we've been coming across a lot of legacy technical debt that we've had to address in terms of compatibility and integration. For the digital workplace, which I'm part of, a lot of that technical debt has been decommissioned and allowed us to get to a very rich set of services for our employees. I think as part of our modernisation, what we embarked upon 6 years ago, we disaggregated away from, we just had one supplier supplying all our services. So we disaggregated that, we set up a set of product teams, and we've grown our own capability, which then leads to another challenge around growing capability. So we're now competing in the same market as everybody in this room, some of the major suppliers in terms of technical resource, product SMEs, analysts, data performance analysts. And then the third one I would come to would be, and Dominic touched on this as well, I think he called it generational challenges, and we badge that as digital confidence. So we're actively helping 100,000 colleagues become digital confident with the services that we're providing from a collaboration and communication perspective, so that we can really get value from the service that we've invested a significant amount of money in. And that's challenging when 80% of our colleagues are dealing with citizens day to day. They're trying to help people save for the future. They're trying to get people into work. So I'd say technical debt, capability, and confidence.
I think confidence and skill is definitely a hot topic at the moment, isn't it? As again, to that new services, new products, there's the question of confidence around, will AI take my job, and all of those kind of aspects as well. So no, it's really interesting, and I like the summary of the three areas. I think that's on point, and definitely something we're seeing in Virgin Media O2 as well. Alan, could I come to you? What's the role now of an IT partner in this, and has that kind of changed recently? And
yeah, definitely. I think we can trace our roots back to 1884. Quite proud of that. And much like every business in the room, probably we consider ourselves to be experts in what we do, what our clients need. And traditionally, when we're looking at IT services, we've got our own business plan. We know what we're aiming for. We've got our own strategies, technology roadmap, etc. So previously, when we were getting IT services providers, we have a clear idea about what we want, the quality of the service, the usual SLAs, KPIs, all that good stuff. I think when AI or generative AI that's come around, we've realized quite quickly that we're suddenly not the experts anymore. And so our IT service providers, rather than just giving us what we want, we're actually being a bit more collaborative with them. I think one of the things that we are very acutely aware of is, even though it's our size, we're only in the UK. And a lot of our IT services providers, whether they're boutiques all the way up to the big names, Microsoft and Salesforce, I think we're asking them to lead us on the journey, to explain to us where this thing is going, and it's moving every day, right? So it's constant collaboration and partnership. I think the other thing that's really interesting that we've probably never really explored is we're speaking to IT service providers about what they do with other clients, UK, Europe, and wider, but also what they're doing in their business. One of our largest providers at the moment, some of their people are actually fed into government policy. And so finding out what they've done in terms of the policy frameworks they had with their own governance and how they're tackling it is adding a lot of value to us. And it's outside of the traditional scope that we'd go with IT services. It's it's an interesting, eye-opening journey of which they're more partners now than beforehand, just contractual levers, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think the how do you guide from previous experience and from other experience as well? So I know myself and Alan sit on an innovation forum where we look at, best practice. And it's been a very successful forum, and we've did a survey with members recently. We said, what's the number one benefit of the forum? And I think you all reported back exactly the same. It was hearing what other people were doing. So it's kind of that shared learning and insight to see the early adopters.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is a challenge for us, but also a big opportunity, is that even though we're one group, we're 17 different brands and quite aggressive with mergers and acquisitions. So I'll probably need to check the news just in case there's another one. But because we work across utilities, we work across transport, rail, aviation, it also gives us an opportunity to be like digital disruptors. So quite often we see things in the water industry maybe that we say, well, actually that could work in the rail sector. That's something that we have a unique perspective on that maybe others don't. And I think the AI Forum is a really good example where we're on the panel with people that are beside us and in public and private sector, and seeing how people are tackling the emergence of AI, and it adds a lot of value to us.
Mm-hmm. We're going to hear AI in our sleep tonight, I think, aren't we? It's going to be an echo that comes back to us. Laurie, if I could come to you, obviously these two have huge organisations of workforce that they're trying to keep both connected and with the latest and greatest technology. One thing we mentioned earlier is about AI inadvertently leading to improve the accessibility, and not just for sight loss, but for disability, for neurodiversity. How do you find it at the moment? What's the current accessibility market?
Well, it's patchy, let's put it that way. There are some trailblazers, some people that are doing really well and have done it for quite some time, not naming no names, but Apple, for example, since 2008, the iPhone was perfectly suitable for anybody with a sight impairment, so had all the accessibility features built in. And just on a side, if you catch somebody with a sight impairment and you show that you care, you will have their loyalty. They don't move away from somebody that's demonstrated that they've been taken into consideration in their needs. And even if you make a mistake, they'll say, oh, they'll fix it and go on. So going back to the original question, sorry, just aside, it's patchy. So you have the big players, that will have broadly accessible tools, and then you will have some that are maybe, haven't, got the breadth of audience, and so accessibility has gone a little bit on the sideways. And we come sometimes in the organization to try and get a collaboration tool out there, and we realize that it's not suitable for our blind and partially sighted colleagues. And so we need to work with in partnership if the business wants, we're always happy to give our expertise, involve users and so on, to bring the standard of accessibility to a certain level. I think some of the tools that are out there are broadly accessible, but there's a difference between it being accessible and being usable. Often our colleagues saying, oh, I've had trouble with this tool, because there's so much in some of these tools. There's so much functionality. And often when you talk to users, when they're testing stuff, I think they say less is more. So it's making sure that the functionality is there, is needed, and then make it as easy to get, to, or provide training and so on. Because often the problem is not that it's not accessible; it's that the learning curve to learn that tool is so steep that you give up, kind of thing. And then there are some tools that are very visual, and so that. The nature of it is that it's difficult to make something that is trying to provide information in a very visual format, which is fine, but we need to find a way to provide it in a different way in audio. And those are, obviously working on accessibility, but are not there yet.
Agreed. And I know I was speaking, we were joining a Zoom call with one of your colleagues recently, and they couldn't go off mute. And they said they were dreadfully sorry that they were 5 minutes trying to get off mute, but they'd moved the mute button. Yeah. So an innocent update in a bit of functional software, and her frustration was, why didn't they bloody tell me?
And that's my other point. Often you get changes in the program, the tool gets updated, a new version, and as somebody who uses accessibility, I have to relearn the package, because once I'm familiar with it, I'll be very quick with it. But if I have to, where's the, like you said, the mic button happened a few months ago. Yes, I remember that. People saying, I can't come off.
Couldn't get off mute.
Yeah, so they get fixed pretty quickly, because if you're a big player, you fix it pretty quickly, you learn about it pretty quickly. But if there's no reason to change it, I do testing and people say, oh, we're moving the mic on from the keyboard on the phone to that place. And I say, is there a reason for doing it that, or are we just doing it for the sake of doing it, of making something different? Because you are making, you as a sighted person can see it moved. Oh, it's down there. 2-3 times you learn it. As somebody who needs to go around listening to the audio and the screen reader, and you might be taking, 10 minutes to find it, and the next time, another 5 minutes, and so on. So you're making things more difficult unless there is a really good reason to move things. Stay put.
Yeah,
Yes.
We had the same issue with a different supplier. Yeah, just something as subtle as that. And
Yeah, I think we had.
I mean, you could, with 100,000 people in the organisation, you can imagine the impact that has on some colleagues.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that's probably tip number 1 then. The solid tip is if you're going to make changes to a platform, how do we think about announcing that to the user group? And I don't think this is just about sight loss as well. I think this is about neurodiversity as well. Yeah. Neil, what do you think, as we give tips and offer advice and guidance, what do you think the most important factors that you look at from a provider?
I asked the team this last week. The chat exploded.
Did it?
I think I'm going to get asked this question. I think that there's a few things. So value, not necessarily cheap. We want things that work, are reliable, performant, easy to maintain. So I think it's value. I think there's something about organisations' approach to inclusive design. We've just been talking there around accessibility. I think there's something in the space around the ability to understand our problems, so relationships, I think, understanding our problems and the opportunities, and then working with us with solutions to try and solve those problems, as opposed to sometimes we're putting technology out there and looking for a problem to solve. Data. So more and more we're leveraging data to drive performance, so to predict and prevent service issues or drive adoption. And when we've got quite a lot of different partners, the ability for us to get access to your data in order to gain that insight for us to kind of help support our users. And then social responsibility. So we work with some large suppliers, some small SMEs, and each of those partners do really well when they kind of contribute beyond the product. So I can think of one small SME that we've been working with now for around 5 years, who really took on board our challenge around inclusive design. They were running our intranet services to a point where they embedded a sort of a particular service within their organisation to help with testing inclusive design. And they've now rolled that out to local organisations in the community to come in and kind of make use of that. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I talked earlier about digital confidence and maximising value from the services that we've got out there. It's all about adoption for us, those 100,000 people, giving them confidence to kind of change the way they work. And another organisation has helped us train 22,000 work coaches on, it just so happens to be accessibility fundamentals, so that they can then pay that forward to sort of the citizens of the UK. So there's quite a few things in there that we'd look for beyond sort of product.
I think you're a huge advocate of accessibility, Neil, Laurie, there, and probably some best practice.
Well, we so much so that we've got we have an accessibility team as part of our team, and we're obviously pushing the providers to this button's shifted, or this is not accessible for a sort of a screen reader. And just on the AI as well, talked about the meeting summarization. That's definitely a use case for neurodiverse and colleagues that are either partially sighted or blind. So we've got, you met Graham a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I did,
So Graham's blind, and he was sort of describing, for him to be present in a meeting, he's trying to listen to the conversation, he's trying to take notes, and he's trying to contribute to the conversation and add value to the conversation. This summarization is just a game changer for him, because he can just be present in the meeting, and he's got the actions and notes at the end of it.
Yeah, it is quite incredible, isn't it? And I saw a feature recently that can listen in a lecture. So, and for neurodiversity, people who are struggling to kind of focus on a college lecturer, perhaps, in a busy environment, actually the AI can train on the lecturer and then summarize the notes in real time. So as the lecturer is speaking, he could receive a summary of where it was. So while it was struggling to block out the peripheral noise, AI actually solved that problem. Again, these are things that I'm certain that wasn't in the design, but it's a happy coincidence, and we'll take it, right? So I think that's important. Neil, you mentioned also about data, and I think we've spoke about generational impacts as well and preferences. I think we're all seeing this step change to new attitudes to data. But I think obviously we've got to be mindful of the security of that and the buy-in. But it does feel as though in our organisation and in the organisations I speak to, that people are happier to share a degree of data in return for either improvements to service. I'll ask the whole panel that really. Is that something that you're seeing? Is attitudes to data changing?
I think we have in government generally, the whole value that data can bring to driving service performance has significantly changed over the last number of years. Clearly, we're focused on safely leveraging that data, so privacy, security. We're looking after your information, so we've got to be confident that it's safe, secure, and it's private, whilst at the same time leveraging that data to drive all sorts of things, not just within DWP, but sharing that data across government so that we can get more joined outcomes across the UK.
Yeah, I think it is. It's definitely a change in an evolution of time, isn't it? I'm going to go back to AI. Forgive me. I think we can't avoid it.
Come in on that. So,
sorry, Alan. Yes.
I don't know if it's a good analogy. Apologies. This is I do enjoy a good analogy. When we're talking about AI, we are very nervous about what happens to our data. We absolutely want to get more value out of it. But a good example is if I go to Marks and Spencer's, for example, and I pick up a steak, I can tell apparently exactly which cow that came from. That's what they say on the packet. They can go all the way through the supply chain back to the cow in the field. It's the same with AI. If someone comes through the door and says, this is AI enabled, these days, within the past year, it's surprising if they don't say that. But if they can't go all the way through the supply chain and tell me what's happening with the data, where it's being processed, what it's being used for, then the door shuts very quickly. Yeah. So I think that's a thing for, potentially for people in the room today, is that just to say AI isn't good enough. It's certainly not for us. We're managing data, much the same as DWP, very sensitive data. Some of it's not ours, it's on behalf of other people. And if we can't trace that all the way back through the supply chain and where that's being processed and the correct agreements, if it's going offshore, and then it's just a flat no and we move on. That's an incredibly important part of our AI journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, forgive me, but AI again, and back to you, Alan, on this, but you know, where are we seeing AI in your organisation? What's the deployment look like?
So we've been using AI for a few years. We're an operational business, vans driving up and down the country. I think, depending on when we look, we're the 4th largest fleet in the country, behind people like the AA and the Royal Mail. We are data hungry. We take lots of photographs. We love a photograph. And so we're using technology on the images, image data capture, that kind of thing. We're also doing real-time video analysis for things like risk assessments. Nothing is so important that we cannot take the time to do it safely. That's our tagline. And so anything that promotes health and safety, we've been working in that space for a few years. I think everyone's quite friendly. I might be judged by this, but when the emergence of generative AI came out, we did a full Italian job and we blocked it. CIO, our board, was so nervous about what this actually meant that we blocked access to things like ChatGPT and Google Bard from our network because we just didn't know what was happening with the data. It's a virtual window we're talking about, where we're talking about information security and data loss prevention. People could be pouring information into this window and what's happening to it, and who's training on it and who's looking at it and that kind of thing. From there, I guess we had a pincer movement. There were two things that we focused on. One was around education of ourselves and our users. So we, speaking to our supply chain, which we talked about earlier, and understanding what happens to this data, what is the benefits, but there's a lot of myths. What is generative AI really good at, what it's not good at, hallucinations and making things up, that kind of thing. Let's make sure we know what this thing is and what it's not. So we went on a great education drive for all of our users, and then we went similarly at the same time with policy as well. So usage policy guidelines before we even started opening up. And I would say even today, the floodgates haven't opened. We are using Copilot for a certain amount, but any generative AI that we are using on our own data absolutely stays with our environment. Nothing leaves. And we're getting quite good results from things like, we've got so many health and safety policies, procedures coming out from our clients, from industry, from government, pulling all of that in one place and having AI sit on the top to be able to leverage that information, which is more meaningful. So rather than just doing a word search, for example, actually asking, how do I do this job? And it will search across all of those and then leverage that information in a very palatable way for our operations to consume that. And anything that improves our health and safety is great for us. Yeah. So that's some of the things that we're looking at now.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think Magnus mentioned it earlier as well, AI for the sake of AI. I think it's now we're seeing it in these use cases, and that's something I'm particularly interested in is, take it out of the kids cheating the homework using chat to actually, practical applications that are in the enterprise, and that's what you guys are starting to explore already.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's one of the sayings that you've used in the past as well, that if you don't have a good business case, then the technology is just a gadget. And so there is absolutely, in the business, and I think in the wider world, the fear of missing out. Anyone wants to jump on the bandwagon and they feel like if they're not using AI, then there must be a problem. But we'd like to think we haven't fallen in that hole. We've probably got a bit of learning ourselves. We're not mature, but we absolutely see that in our technology roadmap. It's coming, we will use it, but only in a secure, managed way where that we know exactly where that information is going and who's looking at it and where it's being processed.
Yeah, and I think that's critical, isn't it, as all our respective organisations, as we've talked, data security, sensible and responsible use of it, and I think, all of that applies to our business as usual, and now we have to apply it to AI and the plethora of services. Neil, I think we talked, you obviously have the largest organisation in terms of employees, and we'll hear more as well today. All of these new technologies are coming. How do you manage, any tips on managing how people adopt to those into the organisation, how you manage the people journey of change, if that makes sense?
It's very difficult. Clearly, you need an ambition as an organisation to kind of buy into the value of growing capability generally, and leaders showing the way to some of that. So there's a variety of activities that a lot of our leaders across the organisation are showing the way and demonstrating the value of these services and subtly changing the way that they work. There's quite a lot of I talked about legacy technical debt before, but we've come across quite a lot of legacy process as well. So there's a lot of business process engineering that we're doing as well in order to adopt new ways of working, to adopt the technology. We've got a network of champions that we set up. So we've got around 1,000 colleagues up and down the country that are our champions network. They get their hands on some of the new features and releases to test, to give us feedback. They help roll that out within each of the sites and each of the teams. And, the usual Learn Hub that we've got set up for. It's changing over time. It's moving away from this is how you, I'm trying not to use a supplier here, but this is how you work X, and more activity-based learning. So this is how to run a really good hybrid meeting and kind of go through a storyboard through our Learn Hub, as opposed to focusing specifically on technology. So probably leadership, a network or a community to get the message out there and support each other, and then activity-based learning.
Yeah, I think a theme I'm picking up from this is about that kind of how we can make it work for us, whether it's in accessibility, whether it's working smarter, leading by example of the Champion Network. I really like that. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I just want one final question, a snappy answer from you all, if we can. What is the technology that you're most excited about, and you can't say AI? Alan,
I wasn't
I'm
going to
you
say
first.
AI. The one I'm most excited by, yet we don't have a clear business case, which is quite ironic, is spatial computing.
Spatial computing.
And that's the issue in the fact of we're an operational business. That should absolutely be our wheelhouse, but can't find a really good use case that's repeatable with the cost of the hardware, but it's coming. And that's the thing that's probably going to be a game changer for us.
Well, I'll back you on that as well. As a futurist, spatial compute is going to transform everything, particularly the future of work. So I think that's a hot one. Laurie.
I'm afraid I'm going to go against you, not AI, because it's so important. The changes that it can make for blind and partially people, like reading your menu in a restaurant, navigating from A to B and not getting lost coming here to Bishopsgate, for example, this morning, you will make so much difference. So sorry, it's the AI changes.
You're forgiven. It makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Neil.
I'm going to go. It's not something we're looking at as an organisation, but I've always had if you've got kids and they're into the VRs, I've always been fascinated with augmented and mixed reality and seeing where that's going to go. There's more and more, the price point's coming down. There's more and more use cases now that are getting solved by that. So yeah. I'm interested to see where that goes in terms of an enterprise use case.
Well, I think we've probably guided the future for sure, Laurie.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Whatever you're planning, whatever tool is coming, make it accessible and build it from the beginning. First, design it and think of accessibility, not at the end. That's my last words.
Accessibility at the core, absolutely. And I think to Neil's point around XR, yes, again, for building on that spatial compute to truly travel without moving. Never replicate the days like today, but it'll get there. So to summarize points that we've pointed here, I think with strong theme of digital confidence, the role of the partner, role of the supplier to support that, whether it's through skills update, whether it's through clarifying and educating on what the products are. Accessibility from the start. Laurie, that's the answer here, isn't it? Don't put it in as an afterthought. And if you do change things, make sure that you notify and educate. I think from a partner, we're looking at value, we're looking at inclusive design, we're looking at the kind of understanding the real priorities of what that organisation, with new attitudes to what will AI do, what is the usage of my data as well. And I think it's about those additional bits, those special parts, such as social responsibility, adding to that inclusive design. So yeah, I think that's probably us, and thank you ever so much for joining us. I'd like to give a big round of applause to our panel, Neil, Laurie and Alan. And thank you ever so much. I'll welcome Dom back to the stage. Thank you.